There's a word that's been circulating in Silicon Valley boardrooms and content moderation meetings, whispered with a mix of dread and dark humor. The word is slop, not garbage, not spam, slop. It's the perfect term for what's flooding our digital world: content that looks real, sounds authoritative, and means absolutely nothing. AI-generated articles that read smoothly but say nothing. Videos with human-like narration explaining concepts the algorithm doesn't understand. Social media posts engineered to trigger engagement without conveying truth. We're drowning in it. And here's the uncomfortable reality. This isn't a technological problem we can engineer our way out of. It's an economic transformation, as profound as the Industrial Revolution, and it's turning our entire understanding of value upside down. For most of human history, the bottleneck was production. Information was scarce because creating it required enormous effort. A medieval manuscript took months to copy by hand. Each letter formed carefully by candlelight. Each page a work of devotion and labor. The scarcity wasn't artificial, it was fundamental to the technology of the time. A newspaper required printing presses, distribution networks, and teams of journalists. The capital investment alone put publishing out of reach for most people. Even a simple blog post required someone to sit down, think, and type. The barrier was low compared to medieval manuscripts, but it still existed. Time, attention, the physical act of creation. Scarcity created value. If you wanted expertise, you paid for it, because expertise took years to develop and was expensive to access. The entire economic structure of knowledge work rested on this foundation. Lawyers charged by the hour because legal knowledge was scarce and took years to acquire. You couldn't just Google case law or ask an AI to draft a motion. You needed someone who had spent 3 years in law school, passed the bar, and accumulated practical experience. Doctors commanded high salaries because medical expertise required decades of training. First an undergraduate degree, then medical school, then residency, then specialization. By the time a cardiologist was fully trained, they'd invested 15 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. That investment had to be recouped. Consultants earned premium fees because business insight was valuable precisely because it was rare. Strategy frameworks weren't freely available online. Market analysis required proprietary data. The value was in knowing things other people didn't know. Then we built machines that can produce unlimited content at effectively zero marginal cost. Not just any content: coherent, grammatically correct, superficially convincing content. The first wave of this happened with the internet itself. Suddenly, anyone could publish. Blogs proliferated. Wikipedia emerged. YouTube democratized video production. But there was still a human bottleneck. Someone had to write the blog post. Someone had to film and edit the video. Someone had to research the Wikipedia article. The internet reduced distribution costs to zero, but production still required human time and effort. The second wave, the one we're living through, now removes even that constraint. Large language models can generate articles in seconds. Image generators can create illustrations instantly. Video synthesis tools can produce content without filming anything. The bottleneck didn't just loosen, it exploded. Today, a single person with the right tools can generate more written content in an afternoon than a medieval monastery produced in a year. We can create videos faster than anyone could watch them. We can write articles faster than anyone could read them. We can generate images faster than anyone could view them. The old economics of information scarcity has collapsed entirely, and we're only beginning to understand what rises from the rubble. The immediate effect is what we're calling slop. It's everywhere now. Search for almost any topic on Google, and the first page of results is increasingly populated by AI-generated content farms. Articles that seem to answer your question but leave you somehow less informed than when you started. They have the structure of informative content: introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion, but no actual insight. Product reviews written by algorithms that have never touched the products they're reviewing. They know the specifications because they scraped them from manufacturer websites, but they can't tell you whether the product actually solves your problem. Medical advice from systems that don't understand biology. They can recombine information from medical databases, but they don't grasp the underlying mechanisms of disease. Investment analysis from models that can't actually comprehend financial risk. They can identify correlations in historical data, but they don't understand causation or context. The quality varies wildly, but the quantity is infinite. And here's what makes it insidious. Most of it isn't obviously wrong. It's plausible. A casual reader might not notice anything amiss. It's grammatically correct, which already puts it ahead of a lot of human-generated content. It mimics the structure and tone of legitimate expertise. It uses the right vocabulary. Cites sources, sometimes fabricated ones, but formatted correctly, and presents information with confidence. In a world where we're scrolling quickly, skimming for answers, making snap judgments, Slop is the perfect camouflage. It's junk food masquerading as nutrition. Empty calories for the mind. This creates a crisis that goes far deeper than annoyance or inconvenience. When everything looks like expertise, how do you identify actual expertise? When anyone can generate convincing-sounding content about anything, what does it mean to be an expert at all? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're reshaping how we make decisions, allocate resources, and structure our economy. A doctor spends a decade learning medicine anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, clinical practice. They see thousands of patients. They learn to recognize subtle patterns that don't appear in textbooks. They develop intuition about when something doesn't quite fit. But now, a patient can find 1,000 AI-generated articles that contradict the doctor's advice, each one sounding equally authoritative. The patient doesn't know the articles are generated by algorithms. They just know they found information that confirms what they wanted to hear. A financial advisor offers guidance based on years of experience. They've lived through multiple market cycles. They've seen how clients react to volatility. They understand the psychological factors that cause people to make bad decisions with money. But the client has already read 50 algorithm-generated investment strategies that promise better returns with less risk. The strategies sound sophisticated. They use technical terminology. They cite historical data. The client doesn't realize the AI doesn't actually understand risk, doesn't account for individual circumstances, doesn't grasp the behavioral pitfalls that derail most investment plans. The expertise is real. The credentials are legitimate. But in the ocean of slop, how do you signal that? How do you prove value when value itself has become impossible to verify? We've been here before, not with artificial intelligence, but the pattern is familiar. Every major information revolution in human history has triggered the same crisis of trust, the same collapse of existing gatekeepers, the same desperate search for new ways to identify what's real. The printing press didn't just democratize knowledge, it destroyed the monopoly of religious authorities who had controlled access to sacred texts for centuries. Before Gutenberg, if you wanted to know what the Bible said, you asked a priest. The priest read Latin. You didn't. The priest had access to manuscripts. You didn't. The priest's interpretation was authoritative because you had no way to verify it independently. The system worked, after a fashion, because information scarcity made centralized authority inevitable. Suddenly, anyone could print anything. Pamphlets flooded European cities. Martin Luther's 95 Theses went viral in the 16th century equivalent of Internet time. Competing interpretations of Scripture proliferated. Radical religious movements emerged, claiming direct access to divine truth without clerical mediation. The Catholic Church's authority crumbled, not because the printing press made them wrong, but because it made their gatekeeping function obsolete. If anyone could read the Bible, why did you need a priest to interpret it for you? The question was revolutionary. The implications were catastrophic for the existing order. What followed wasn't immediate enlightenment. It was religious warfare. The Protestant Reformation sparked conflicts that killed millions. Conspiracy theories flourished. Catholics accused Protestants of devil worship. Protestants accused Catholics of corruption and idolatry. Fake documents circulated, claiming to reveal various conspiracies. With no established mechanism for verifying information, people believed whatever confirmed their existing loyalties. It took more than a century for new institutions to emerge that could restore some semblance of shared truth. Universities developed standards for scholarship. Scientific societies created peer review. Newspapers established editorial processes. These institutions weren't perfect, but they provided frameworks for collective truth-seeking in an age of information abundance. The telegraph created a similar disruption in the 19th century before instantaneous communication. News traveled slowly, filtered through established channels, verified by known authorities. A letter from London to New York took weeks. By the time information arrived, it had passed through multiple hands, each adding context and verification. The telegraph collapsed. Distance. Suddenly, information could cross continents in minutes. Messages arrived, raw and unfiltered. The result wasn't clarity, it was confusion. Rumors spread faster than corrections. A garbled telegraph message could crash markets before anyone could verify the information. In 1865, false reports of military victories and defeats during the American Civil War caused wild swings in commodity prices. Traders acted on incomplete or fabricated information because speed mattered more than accuracy. The old mechanisms for validating information, personal reputation, institutional authority, the slow accumulation of corroborating evidence, couldn't keep pace with the speed of the telegraph wire. A banker in New York receiving a telegraph from London had no way to know if the sender was reliable, if the message had been garbled in transmission, or if the information was already outdated by the time it arrived. It took decades to develop new systems. Wire services like the Associated Press emerged to aggregate and verify information. Journalistic standards evolved to handle the speed of electricity rather than the speed of horses. Editorial processes developed to distinguish urgent news from rumor. Financial markets created clearinghouses and waiting periods to prevent panic based on unverified reports. The telegraph didn't destroy truth, but it forced society to completely rebuild how truth was established and verified. The transition was messy. Fortunes were lost, reputations were destroyed. But eventually, new institutions emerged that could handle the new information environment. The Internet repeated the pattern on a larger scale. In the 1990s, optimists believed that democratizing publishing would create a golden age of information access. The vision was utopian. Everyone could become a publisher. Knowledge would be free. Geographic barriers would disappear. Expertise would be accessible to all. A student in rural India could access the same information as a student at Harvard. A patient in a remote village could research symptoms and treatments. The Internet would level the playing field, create opportunities, and accelerate human progress. And in some ways, that happened. You can learn almost anything online if you know where to look. YouTube has tutorials on everything from quantum physics to woodworking. Wikipedia provides instant access to information that would have required a research library a generation ago. Online courses from elite universities are available for free. The optimists weren't entirely wrong. The Internet has been a tremendous force for democratizing access to information. But we also got misinformation at scale, conspiracy theories that spread faster than facts, anti-vaccine movements that undermine public health, political propaganda disguised as news, echo chambers that reinforce bias rather than challenge it. The collapse of local journalism as advertising revenue migrated online, the fragmentation of shared reality into 1,000 competing narratives, each with its own facts, its own experts, its own epistemology. The Internet didn't make us smarter. It made information so abundant that wisdom became almost impossible to find. Having access to all information proved very different from being able to identify which information matters. Now we're facing the same crisis again, but accelerated and amplified by artificial intelligence. The difference is scale and speed. The printing press took decades to spread across Europe. A single printer could produce maybe a few hundred copies per day. The Internet took years to reach mass adoption. You needed computers, infrastructure, some technical skill. AI content generation went from laboratory curiosity to ubiquitous tool in months. Anyone with a web browser can now generate unlimited content on any topic. The barrier to entry has essentially disappeared. And unlike previous revolutions, this one isn't just changing how we distribute information, it's changing who or what creates it. A printing press still required a human author to write the text being printed. A website still required a human writer to create the content being published. AI generates content autonomously. You can prompt it with a topic and walk away. The human element, the judgment, the expertise, the accountability can be removed entirely from the production process. This is qualitatively different from previous information revolutions. We're not just changing who can publish, we're changing what counts as authorship itself. This is where the economics get interesting. In a world of infinite production, what becomes scarce? Not information. You can't sell information anymore because it's freely available everywhere, not content. There's more content than anyone could consume in 1,000 lifetimes. Not even knowledge in the abstract sense. Facts are abundant, tutorials are everywhere. Data is cheap. What becomes scarce is discernment. The ability to separate signal from noise. To identify what's true, what's useful, what matters. To make judgments that algorithms can't replicate because they require context, nuance, accumulated wisdom, and understanding of human nature. This is the expertise paradox. As AI makes content production cheaper, human judgment becomes exponentially more valuable. Not because judgment is rarer than it used to, there are more educated people on Earth than ever before, but because the ratio of judgment to content has collapsed. We're drowning in information and starving for meaning. It's like what happened with food production. Industrialized agriculture made calories cheap and abundant, but it didn't make nutrition better. In fact, we got an obesity epidemic because empty calories crowded out nutritious food. The same thing is happening with information. AI makes information calories cheap and abundant, but it's creating an epidemic of intellectual malnutrition. Lots of content, no wisdom. Think about how this transforms markets. In the old economy, you paid for information. A newspaper subscription gave you access to news you couldn't get elsewhere. A textbook contained knowledge compiled by experts. A consultant's report provided insights based on proprietary research. The value was in the content itself because content was scarce and expensive to produce. Journalists had to investigate stories. Authors had to research and write. Consultants had to analyze data. These activities took time and effort, and that effort was what you were paying for. In the new economy, content is free. Information wants to be free, as Stuart Brand famously said, and now it actually is. What you're paying for is curation, judgment, trust, someone or something that can sort through the infinite stream of slop and tell you what actually matters. This is already happening across industries. Premium news organizations aren't selling information anymore. Anyone can find news for free on countless websites. They're selling editorial judgment, the assurance that someone knowledgeable has decided this story matters and this story doesn't. The New York Times or The Economist aren't valuable because they're the only source of news. They're valuable because their editors filter the noise and provide context. Financial advisors aren't selling information about stock prices that's freely available on countless websites and apps. They're selling the judgment about what to do with that information. Should you buy, sell, hold? How much should you allocate to different assets? What's your actual risk tolerance, not just what you think it is? These questions require understanding your specific situation, your psychology, your goals, your constraints. An algorithm can optimize a portfolio based on historical returns, but it can't counsel you through a market crash when you're panicking and want to sell everything. That requires human judgment, empathy, and experience. Doctors aren't selling medical facts. You can Google symptoms and get pages of information. They're selling diagnostic judgment that considers your specific situation. Yes, you have these symptoms, but you also have this medical history. You're on these medications. You have these risk factors. The algorithm gives you a list of possible conditions. The doctor narrows it down based on probability, context, and clinical experience. More importantly, the doctor helps you navigate uncertainty. What do we test for first? What's the threshold for more aggressive intervention? How do we balance quality of life against longevity? These aren't questions with algorithmic answers. They require judgment that considers values, not just facts. The entire knowledge economy is restructuring around this insight. Information wants to be free, but judgment wants to be expensive. This creates a winner-to-call dynamic that's reshaping professional hierarchies. In a world of information scarcity, expertise was somewhat democratized. A decent doctor in a small town could make a comfortable living because medical knowledge wasn't easily accessible elsewhere. Patients didn't have alternatives. A competent consultant could build a career because business insights weren't available for free online. Clients paid for access to frameworks and analysis they couldn't get elsewhere. Now information is everywhere, but trust is concentrated. If you can't easily verify expertise, in most fields you can't without being an expert. Yourself, you default to the most credible signals, brand names, credentials from elite institutions, best-selling books, millions of social media followers, personal recommendations from trusted sources. These signals are imperfect, but they're better than nothing. The result is that a small number of recognized experts capture the majority of the value, while everyone else struggles to prove they're not just generating slop. This explains some of the strange dynamics we're seeing in professional services. Why are top-tier consultants from firms like McKinsey or Bain more expensive than ever? When business information is more accessible than ever, you can find strategy frameworks online, case studies are published, research reports are available, but clients aren't paying for information. They're paying for judgment they can trust, and they're paying for the credential that the judgment came from a recognized institution. The McKinsey name serves as a verification mechanism. It signals to boards and shareholders that the company did due diligence. The actual advice might not be better than what a smart independent consultant would provide, but the brand provides cover. Why are luxury brands thriving while mid-tier brands struggle? Because in a world of unlimited production, provenance becomes paramount. Anyone can manufacture a handbag, but only one company makes a Hermes Birkin. The extreme price tens of thousands of dollars for what's functionally just a bag serves as a signal. It says, I have the resources to pay for verified quality and exclusivity. The same dynamic is happening with information and expertise. Anyone can claim to be an expert, but only certain signals, Harvard degree, published book, established platform are expensive enough to be credible. Why are personal brands more valuable than ever? Because individual reputation is one of the few signals that's still hard to fake. You can buy fake credentials, you can hire ghostwriters, you can purchase followers, but building a genuine reputation over years of consistent output and behavior is time-consuming and difficult to shortcut. When Tim Ferriss or Nassim Taleb or Malcolm Gladwell say something, people listen not because they're infallible, but because they've built track records that are difficult to replicate. The personal brand serves as a verification mechanism in an environment where verification is otherwise nearly impossible. The paradox is that democratizing content creation has made expertise more elitist, not less. When anyone can claim expertise, only those with the strongest verification signals, via league degrees, best-selling books, millions of followers, can actually monetize their knowledge. The middle has collapsed. You're either a recognized expert who commands premium prices, or you're competing with free AI-generated content. There's not much space in between. But here's where it gets more complicated. Those traditional signals of expertise are themselves being undermined by the same forces. A degree from a prestigious university used to signal years of rigorous training and selection for ability. But now, you can access the same lectures for free, online, through MIT, OpenCourseWare, or YouTube. The information component of education has been commodified. What remains valuable is the credential itself and the network access. But if the credential is just a signal rather than a guarantee of capability, how long before the market finds ways around it? Publishing a book used to signal that gatekeepers, editors, publishers, reviewers had validated your work. Someone with expertise had read your manuscript and deemed it worthy of publication. But now anyone can self-publish. Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing has democratized book publishing. You can have a book available for sale in 24 hours. The barrier between having written something and being a published author has essentially disappeared. This is good for democracy and bad for verification. How do you distinguish between a self-published book by a genuine expert and slop that an algorithm generated? Accumulating followers used to suggest genuine influence. If thousands of people chose to follow you, that implied you were providing value. But now bots and engagement farms can manufacture social proof. You can buy followers, you can buy likes, you can buy comments. The metrics that used to indicate genuine audience engagement can be faked at scale. This doesn't mean all followers are fake, most aren't, but it does mean that follower count is a less reliable signal than it used to be. The old mechanisms for validating expertise are collapsing just as we need them most. We're in a strange transitional period where the old markers of authority are losing credibility, but new ones haven't fully emerged. It's like the printing press era, when the Catholic Church's authority was crumbling, but the Enlightenment institutions, universities with rigorous scholarship standards, scientific societies with peer review, newspapers with editorial processes hadn't yet been built. That transition took more than a century and was marked by enormous social upheaval. We're in the early stages of a similar transition, and it's equally disorienting. So what fills the vacuum? In the short term, we're seeing a flight to what economists call Veblen goods things that are valuable precisely because they're expensive. Thorstein Veblen identified this pattern in the late 19th century. Certain goods become more desirable as they become more expensive, because the high price itself serves as a signal of exclusivity and status. In a world where most content is free, people pay premium prices for content that signals exclusivity. Private newsletters that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars per year, expensive courses with limited enrollment, elite consulting that charges astronomical hourly rates, membership in exclusive communities with high barriers to entry. The content itself might not be dramatically better than what's available for free. Sometimes it is, but often the difference is marginal. But the price tag serves as a filter. If someone is willing to pay thousands of dollars for advice, they've implicitly verified that they believe it's worth thousands of dollars. The price becomes the signal. This is why high-end coaching and consulting is booming, even as information becomes free. People aren't paying for information. They're paying for access, for exclusivity, for the social proof that comes from being able to afford expensive expertise. This is already creating a two-tier information economy: free content for the masses and expensive curation for elites who can afford to pay for judgment. The masses get algorithmic recommendations, AI-generated advice, and viral content optimized for engagement. The elites get human experts, personalized guidance, and curated information flows. This isn't just about quality, though. The quality difference is real. It's about verification. Free content is unverified. Expensive content comes with some assurance that a human with a reputation at stake has vouched for it. The economic stratification of expertise is creating an epistemic stratification. Different classes of people are living in different information environments with different access to truth. We're also seeing a renaissance of local, personal, verifiable expertise. When you can't trust information from unknown sources, you default to people you know. This explains the growing value of personal networks, mentorship, and community. Professional networks like alumni associations or industry groups are becoming more valuable, not because they provide information you can't get elsewhere, but because they provide trusted relationships. You're more likely to believe career advice from someone you went to school with than from an AI-generated article, even if the content is similar. This is pushing some knowledge work back toward pre-industrial models, apprenticeships instead of online courses. You don't just watch videos about how to do something, you work alongside someone who knows how to do it, observing their judgment in real situations. Personal referrals instead of credentials. Who you know matters more than what certificates you have, because personal relationships are harder to fake than credentials. Small high-trust communities instead of mass markets. Instead of trying to reach everyone, you build deep relationships with a small group who know and trust you. In certain fields, we're watching expertise become more localized and relationship-based, even as technology becomes more global and impersonal. Therapy is a good example. You can find mental health information everywhere online. AI chatbots can even provide basic cognitive behavioral therapy. But effective therapy isn't just about information. It's about relationship, trust, and someone who knows you well enough to recognize patterns you can't see yourself. That requires local, personal connection in a way that resists algorithmic scaling. There's another dynamic that's equally important but less discussed. As AI gets better at mimicking expertise, actual expertise has to move up-market. This is a constant escalation. The tasks that once demonstrated competence writing a basic legal brief, analyzing a standard dataset, diagnosing a common medical condition are being automated. These were never the highest forms of expertise, but they were how people proved they had foundational capability. They were the entry points to professional careers. Junior lawyers drafted briefs, junior analysts ran reports, junior doctors handled routine cases. These roles provided training and income while people developed deeper expertise. Now those entry-level tasks are being automated. What remains is judgment in genuinely ambiguous situations. Expertise isn't knowing things any more algorithms, no more facts than any human. It's not following procedures algorithms, follow procedures perfectly. Expertise is knowing which things matter in which contexts. Recognizing patterns that algorithms miss because they require human experience and intuition. Making decisions when there's no clear right answer, when the rules don't apply, when you have to balance incommensurable values. This is a more demanding form of expertise than what we're used to. It can't be taught through rote learning or memorization. Those methods work for teaching procedures and facts, which is what most education has focused on. But judgment, intuition, wisdom, these require years of practice, exposure to edge cases, accumulated experience, reflection on failure. They're developed through doing, not studying, and they're extremely difficult to verify or signal to others. How do you prove you have good judgment? By having made good decisions. But you can't demonstrate that without having been given the opportunity to make decisions, which you won't get unless you can prove you have good judgment. It's a catch-22 that's particularly brutal for people trying to enter knowledge professions. This creates a crisis for professional education. How do you train people for expertise that can't be codified? Traditional education worked by breaking knowledge into digestible pieces, teaching them systematically, testing for comprehension, and certifying competence. This model works well for explicit knowledge, things that can be written down, explained clearly, and verified objectively. Memorize anatomical structures, learn legal precedents, study mathematical theorems, pass tests that demonstrate you've absorbed the information, get a credential that signals competence. But if the knowledge itself can be replicated by AI, what's the point of that education? Why spend years memorizing things that algorithms know better? We're forced to focus on the parts of expertise that resist automation: judgment, intuition, wisdom. But those are precisely the things that are hardest to teach in traditional educational settings. You can't take a course in wisdom. You can't memorize judgment. You can't get tested on intuition and receive an objective grade. These qualities emerge from experience, from failure, from confronting situations where the rules don't apply and you have to figure things out. This takes time, a lot of time. It's expensive. You're not productive while you're learning through experience. Someone has to invest in giving you opportunities to develop judgment, and that investment may not pay off for years, and it doesn't scale. You can put 10,000 students in an online course and teach them all the same information. But you can't give 10,000 students the same experiential learning. Each person needs individualized guidance, feedback on their specific decisions, exposure to situations that challenge their particular blind spots. This is one reason why elite education is becoming more valuable even as information becomes free. What Harvard or Oxford or Stanford sell isn't primarily information. You can get the same textbooks anywhere, often the same lectures online. What they sell is selection and socialization. Selection, the credential signals that you are smart and accomplished enough to get in, which is valuable independent of what you learned. And socialization. You're integrated into networks where judgment is valued and cultivated. You're exposed to peers who challenge your thinking. You're mentored by professors who model good judgment. You're placed in situations, case studies, simulations, research projects where you have to exercise judgment and receive feedback. This is why elite institutions can charge astronomical tuition even as their lectures are available free online. The information has been commodified, but the experiential learning and network access haven't. And as expertise shifts toward judgment rather than knowledge, this experiential component becomes more valuable, not less. The economic implications are staggering. We're potentially facing a future where human expertise becomes the ultimate luxury good, accessible only to those who can afford it. Medical care might illustrate this trajectory most starkly. Basic diagnostics and treatment protocols can be handled by AI. An algorithm can take your symptoms, run through decision trees, and recommend initial interventions. For routine cases, common cold, minor injuries, standard prescriptions, you don't need an expensive human doctor. The AI is faster, more consistent, and has access to more recent research than any individual physician. But complex cases, ambiguous symptoms that could indicate multiple conditions. Rare diseases, patients with multiple complicating factors require human judgment. The result could be a bifurcated healthcare system. Most people get algorithmic medicine. You input symptoms into an app. The AI asks clarifying questions. It recommends treatments or refers you to specialists. You never see a human doctor unless the algorithm can't handle your case. This is cheaper and more efficient. It extends basic healthcare to more people. But the wealthy pay premium prices for actual human doctors with genuine expertise. Not because humans are always better. The algorithm might be more accurate for routine cases, but because human judgment is valuable for complex cases, and because having access to human expertise is a status symbol and provides psychological comfort. The same pattern could emerge in law. Routine legal work standard contracts, simple wills, uncontested divorces can be handled by legal AI is already quite good at document review and template generation. But complex litigation, high-stakes negotiations, novel legal questions, these require human judgment. The masses get algorithmic legal services. The elites get human lawyers. In education, most students get AI tutors and online courses. The elite get human teachers, small seminars, and personalized mentorship. In financial advice, most people get robo-advisors. The wealthy get human wealth managers who understand their unique circumstances and goals. This has profound implications for social mobility and inequality. In the 20th century, education was the great equalizer. If you could acquire expertise through college, professional training, certification, you could command middle-class wages regardless of your background. A kid from a working-class family could become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. The path was demanding, but it was accessible. Public universities were affordable, student loans were available, and once you had the expertise, you could sell it. The credential mattered more than your family connections. That pathway is narrowing. As basic expertise is automated, only the highest levels of judgment retain value. But developing that judgment requires resources, time, mentorship, exposure to complex problems, freedom to fail, and learn from failure. These are things wealthy people can provide for their children that poor people increasingly cannot. Wealthy families can afford to have their children intern unpaid at prestigious firms, gaining experience. They can provide financial support while their kids take lower-paid apprenticeships. They can use personal networks to open doors. They can afford the elite education that provides not just information, but experiential learning and social capital. We risk creating a new aristocracy of judgment, where the ability to make nuanced decisions in ambiguous situations becomes a hereditary advantage, passed down through privileged access to elite training and networks. This isn't deterministic. Social mobility won't disappear entirely, but it's getting harder. The ladder that previous generations climbed is missing rungs. The entry-level positions that used to provide training are being automated. The credentials that used to open doors are less valuable. The middle-class professional life that expertise once guaranteed is less secure. At the same time, there's a countertrend that's equally important. While high-end expertise becomes more valuable and exclusive, there's also massive value in building systems that can deliver adequate judgment at scale. This is the real opportunity in AI, not replacing expertise entirely, but creating tools that can extend the reach of genuine expertise to more people. A good AI system isn't one that mimics an expert perfectly. It's one that allows an expert to serve 10 times or 100 times as many people by handling routine cases and flagging the complex ones that require human attention. This is already happening in fields like radiology. AI systems are very good at identifying obvious abnormalities in medical images. They can scan thousands of X-rays or MRAs and flag the ones that need expert review. This doesn't replace radiologists. It makes them more efficient. Instead of looking at every routine scan, they can focus on the genuinely difficult cases where their expertise adds value. The radiologist's judgment is leveraged across more patients. This is a good outcome. More people get access to expert oversight without requiring proportionally more experts. The question is whether these systems serve to democratize access to expertise or simply create new barriers between those who can afford human judgment and those who can't. The optimistic scenario is that AI extends the reach of expertise enough that most people get genuinely good care. The pessimistic scenario is that AI provides adequate but mediocre care for the masses, while premium human expertise becomes a luxury good. Which future we get depends on choices about how we structure markets, regulate AI, and invest in human capital. There's also a philosophical dimension here that we can't ignore. What we're really debating isn't just the economics of expertise, but the nature of knowledge itself. For centuries, Western philosophy has operated on the assumption that knowledge can be codified, systematized, and transferred. This is the Enlightenment project. Reduce everything to principles, teach those principles explicitly, and expertise follows naturally. Science works this way. You identify laws of nature, teach them to students, and they can apply those laws to new situations. Much of modern education is built on this model. But what if that's wrong? What if the most important forms of knowledge, judgment, wisdom, discernment are fundamentally tacit, things that can't be fully articulated or systematized? Michael Polanyi, the philosopher of science, argued that we know more than we can tell. An expert chess player can't fully explain why a move feels right. It's not that they're inarticulate, it's that their expertise includes pattern recognition and intuition that operates below the level of conscious articulation. A skilled doctor can't always explain why a patient concerns them. There's something about the presentation that doesn't fit typical patterns, but it's not something they can reduce to explicit criteria. If Polanyi was right, then AI represents not just an economic disruption, but an epistemological crisis. We've built machines that are very good at explicit knowledge things that can be written down, systematized, and replicated. That's what algorithms do. They follow explicit rules. But the most valuable forms of human expertise might be precisely the things that resist that kind of codification. They're tacit, they're contextual, they're developed through lived experience in ways that can't be fully captured by training data or algorithms. This doesn't mean AI can't be useful, even if it can't replicate true expertise. It can handle the explicit, codifiable parts of work and free humans to focus on the tacit, judgment-intensive parts. But it does mean we need to be humble about what AI can accomplish. It's a powerful tool for certain kinds of tasks. It's not a replacement for wisdom. This brings us back to the original question. What is expertise in an age of infinite information? It's not knowing things machines can know things better than we can. It's not producing content machines can generate content faster than we can. It's not following procedures machines follow procedures perfectly. Expertise is the accumulated judgment that allows you to navigate ambiguity, recognize context, integrate contradictory information, and make decisions when the rules don't apply. It's knowing not just what is true, but what matters, not just what to do, but when and why and for whom. These are inherently human capabilities, not because machines couldn't theoretically replicate them, but because they emerge from lived experience in ways that resist algorithmic reproduction. But here's the uncomfortable truth that we need to confront honestly. Most of what we've called expertise in the past wasn't actually this kind of deep, judgment-based expertise. It was pattern matching, rule application, information retrieval, dressed up as insight. And AI is very good at those things. Much of what professionals did was essentially mechanical. They just didn't realize it because the mechanics were hidden inside their heads. The lawyer who drafts standard contracts wasn't exercising profound judgment. They were applying templates, filling in variables, following established patterns. The consultant who analyzes market data wasn't demonstrating wisdom. They were following frameworks, applying standard methodologies, generating reports that looked sophisticated but were essentially algorithmic. The doctor who diagnoses common conditions based on textbook symptoms wasn't using deep intuition. They were pattern matching. Fever, cough, fatigue, probably flu, chest pain, shortness of breath, arm numbness, possible heart attack. These are decision trees that can be programmed. AI can do all of that, often better than humans, because those tasks were always algorithmic. We just didn't have the algorithms yet. We needed humans to be the processors. Now we don't. What we're discovering is that much of what we thought was expertise was actually just information processing. The real expertise, the judgment, the wisdom, the ability to handle genuinely ambiguous situations was always rare. We're only noticing now because everything else is being automated. It's like when manufacturing was automated, and we discovered that most factory jobs didn't actually require craft skill. They required following procedures. The craft skill true mastery of material and technique was rare and always had been. We just hadn't been forced to distinguish between craft and procedure because both required human workers. This is why the death of expertise is really a clarification of expertise. We're being forced to distinguish between knowledge that can be codified and judgment that can't, between information processing and genuine wisdom, between following rules and knowing when to break them, between technical competence and practical wisdom. In some ways, this is healthy. We've probably over-credentialed society, giving authority to people based on degrees and certifications that don't actually predict good judgment. A lot of credentialing was rent-seeking professional guilds protecting their economic interests by requiring expensive training that didn't actually improve outcomes. The AI revolution is a harsh but potentially effective filter. What survives is the expertise that actually matters. What gets automated is the pseudo-expertise that was always just glorified information retrieval. This is painful for individuals whose careers were built on skills that are now being commodified. But it might lead to a more honest understanding of what expertise actually requires. Not memorization, not following procedures, but judgment developed through experience, reflection, and accumulated wisdom. But that clarification comes with enormous costs. The transition is brutal for people who built careers on forms of expertise that are now being automated. A lawyer who specialized in contract review. They went to law school, they passed the bar. They spent years learning the intricacies of contract law. Now, AI can review contracts faster and more consistently. A radiologist who reads routine scans, they completed medical school and residency. They developed the ability to spot abnormalities in medical images. Now algorithms can do the same thing. A financial analyst who processes standard reports, they earned an MBA. They learned financial modeling. Now spreadsheets and AI can generate the same analysis. These people aren't unskilled. They made significant investments in training. They became genuinely competent at their work. But the specific skills they developed are losing market value. The economy is demanding that they move upmarket, develop deeper judgment, or find new roles. That's easy to say in abstract economic terms. In practice, it's devastating. People in their 40s and 50s, established in careers, supporting families, being told their expertise is obsolete. Not because they're bad at their jobs, but because machines can do those jobs cheaper and faster. This is the human cost of technological progress that economic theory often glosses over. Yes, creative destruction is a feature of capitalism. Yes, new opportunities emerge as old ones disappear. Yes, the economy adapts and people ultimately find new roles. But these adjustments happen at the scale of generations, not individuals. The textile workers displaced by mechanization in the 19th century didn't retrain as factory managers. Their children or grandchildren eventually found new opportunities in the industrial economy. But the individual workers suffered. They lost their livelihoods, their identities, their communities. The same is happening now to knowledge workers whose skills are being automated. There's also a collective action problem that makes this transition harder than it needs to be. Individually, it's rational to use AI to boost productivity, reduce costs, and gain competitive advantage. Every business wants to be more efficient. Every professional wants to leverage tools that make them more productive. Every individual acting rationally contributes to the flood of AI-generated content. But collectively, if everyone produces more content using AI, we make the information environment worse for everyone. Each piece of slop is barely noticeable on its own. The aggregate effect is a tragedy of the commons. We're polluting the information ecosystem the same way we polluted the physical environment during industrialization. Individual factories dumping waste into rivers were making rational economic decisions. Cleaner disposal was expensive. The river was free, but collectively, all the factories together destroyed the rivers and poisoned the environment. We eventually recognized this required collective regulation. Environmental laws, emission standards, pollution taxes, mechanisms to force individual actors to internalize the collective costs of their behavior. We might need something similar for information pollution. But what does that look like? How do you regulate AI-generated content without stifling legitimate innovation? How do you distinguish slop from valuable AI-assisted work? Do you tax content generation, require labeling of AI content, create liability for spreading misinformation? These questions don't have obvious answers. Any regulation will have unintended consequences, but unregulated information pollution may ultimately make collective truth-seeking impossible. Some people argue that the market will solve this naturally. Bad AI content won't get engagement. Users will learn to recognize slop and avoid it. Quality will rise to the top. Evolution will favor sources that provide value. But that's probably naive, based on our experience with previous media revolutions. Quality doesn't always win in information markets. What wins is what captures attention, triggers emotion, confirms biases, and spreads virally. Slop can be very good at those things. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Confirmation feels better than challenge. Simple answers are more satisfying than complex truth. Moreover, the people producing slop have strong incentives to get better at mimicking quality. This is an evolutionary arms race. As users get better at detecting AI content, generators get better at making AI content undetectable. As platforms develop filters, content farms develop workarounds. There's no obvious equilibrium. We might just cycle through progressively more sophisticated forms of information pollution, never reaching a stable state where quality reliably outcompetes garbage. The optimistic scenario is that we develop new institutions and social technologies for validating expertise in the AI age. New forms of credentialing that actually test judgment rather than knowledge. Practical assessments where you demonstrate competence in ambiguous situations. Rather than answering multiple choice questions, new platforms that successfully separate signal from noise. Reputation systems that reward genuine expertise rather than engagement. Curation services that employ human judgment to filter information flows. New economic models that properly value judgment rather than just content production. This is possible. We've done it before, after previous information revolutions. The printing press was followed eventually by universities with rigorous scholarship standards, scientific societies with peer review, newspapers with editorial processes. The telegraph led to wire services, journalistic standards, and verification systems. The internet is slowly developing fact-checking organizations, platform moderation, and media literacy initiatives. These institutional solutions take time. They require experimentation. Many attempts fail before something works, but eventually societies adapt. The question is how long that adaptation takes and how much damage occurs in the meantime. The printing press triggered a century of religious warfare before new institutions emerged. We hopefully won't need a century to adapt to AI, but we might need decades. And in the meantime, we're in a transitional period where the old markers of expertise have lost credibility, but new ones haven't emerged. That creates anxiety, confusion, polarization, and a general sense that we can't trust anything or anyone. These are not abstract concerns. They have real consequences for public health, democratic governance, economic stability, and social cohesion. The pessimistic scenario is darker. Maybe we never develop those new institutions. Maybe the information environment becomes so polluted with slop that genuine expertise becomes effectively invisible. Maybe we fragment into tribal enclaves where people only trust their in-group and dismiss everyone else as liars or dupes. Maybe expertise becomes purely a function of social proof rather than actual capability. Whoever has the most followers must be right, regardless of what they know or whether they're generating substantive insight or just engagement bait. Maybe we lose the ability to have productive disagreement because we can't agree on what constitutes valid evidence or legitimate authority. Some of this is already happening. Political polarization isn't just about policy differences, it's about epistemic differences, different groups living in different factual universes, with different trusted sources, different evidentiary standards, different basic assumptions about reality. Climate change, vaccine safety, election integrity, economic policy. On these and many other issues, people don't just disagree about what to do. They disagree about what the facts are, and they can't resolve those disagreements because they don't share common authorities or methods for determining truth. What's at stake isn't just economics or individual careers. It's our collective capacity to make good decisions about complex challenges that will define the 21st century. Climate change requires integrating scientific expertise about atmospheric systems, economic expertise about energy transitions, political expertise about international cooperation, and social expertise about behavioral change. Pandemic response requires medical expertise about disease transmission, public health expertise about population-level interventions, economic expertise about balancing health and prosperity, and communication expertise about maintaining public trust. Financial regulation requires economic expertise about market dynamics, technical expertise about complex instruments, legal expertise about regulatory frameworks, and psychological expertise about human behavior under uncertainty. Technological governance deciding how to develop and deploy AI itself requires technical expertise about capabilities and risks, ethical expertise about values and rights, economic expertise about impacts on labor and wealth, and political expertise about democratic control of powerful systems. All of these challenges require genuine expertise. Not information. Anyone can Google facts about climate science or epidemiology or AI, but judgment, the ability to weigh uncertain evidence, consider long-term consequences, integrate insights from multiple domains, balance competing values, and make decisions even when there's no perfect answer. If we lose the ability to identify and empower that kind of expertise, we lose the ability to navigate the challenges that will shape civilization's trajectory. The death of expertise isn't just about what happens to individual professionals or industries, it's about whether we can function as a civilization in an age of complexity. So, where does that leave us? The uncomfortable answer is that we're in the middle of a transformation whose outcome isn't yet determined. AI isn't inherently good or bad for expertise. Like any powerful technology, it amplifies both our capabilities and our vulnerabilities. It can extend the reach of genuine wisdom, allowing experts to serve more people and tackle bigger problems. Or it can proliferate sophisticated nonsense at unprecedented scale, drowning signal in noise until truth becomes impossible to find. Which future we get depends on choices we're making right now. Do we invest in developing genuine judgment or chase the illusion of automated expertise? Do we build institutions that can validate capability or default to tribal affiliation and social proof? Do we reward depth or engagement? Do we prioritize truth or virality? Do we structure markets to value human judgment or to minimize costs through automation? Do we educate for wisdom or just for credential accumulation? Do we cultivate relationships and networks that foster trust or retreat into algorithmic mediation of all interaction? These questions don't have easy answers. Different people will have different values and priorities. That's legitimate. But ignoring the questions isn't an option. The flood of slop isn't going away. It's accelerating. Every month, AI systems become more capable, more accessible, more deeply integrated into our information infrastructure. The ratio of content to judgment will continue to deteriorate. The old certainties about how to identify expertise will continue to erode. We can't stop that technological trajectory. The tools are too useful and too widely available. The economic incentives are too strong. But we can choose how we respond. We can choose to value genuine expertise even when it's expensive and difficult to verify, even when it's slower than algorithms, even when it contradicts what we want to hear. We can choose to invest in developing judgment in ourselves and others rather than just accumulating information. We can choose to build communities and institutions that reward depth over superficiality, truth over engagement, wisdom over cleverness. We can choose to be skeptical consumers of information while remaining open to legitimate expertise. We can choose to recognize that uncertainty isn't weakness, and that admitting "I don't know" is often more honest than pretending to have answers. The death of expertise is really a transformation of expertise, a violent, disorienting, economically brutal transformation, but a transformation nonetheless. What's dying is the idea that expertise is primarily about knowing things, having credentials, producing content, or following procedures. Those were always imperfect proxies for the real thing. What might be being born if we're wise enough to cultivate? It is a deeper understanding of expertise as judgment, wisdom, and the hard-won ability to navigate ambiguity. That's always been the real heart of expertise. We just lost sight of it in an era when information scarcity made simple knowledge seem valuable. Now that information is overwhelmingly abundant, we're being forced to rediscover what actually matters. Not what you know, but how you think. Not what you can produce, but how you can judge. Not your credentials, but your wisdom. Not your ability to follow rules, but your ability to know when the rules don't apply. Not your technical competence, but your practical judgment. These are fundamentally human qualities. They emerge from experience, reflection, failure, and the messy process of living in the world with other people. They can't be shortcut by technology or taught through algorithms. The most valuable asset on Earth in the coming decades isn't going to be information. We have too much information already. It's not even going to be intelligence in the narrow sense of processing power or IQ. AI has plenty of that. The most valuable asset is going to be judgment you can trust. The ability to make good decisions in ambiguous situations where the rules don't provide clear answers, the wisdom to know what matters and what doesn't, what's urgent and what's merely noisy, the courage to say I don't know when that's the honest answer, and the humility to keep learning when you're wrong, the integrity to prioritize truth over convenience, accuracy over engagement, long-term wisdom over short-term profit. These are fundamentally human qualities. They aren't about raw computational power machines. Have more of that. They're about lived experience, accumulated wisdom, moral clarity, and practical judgment. They emerge from years of practice in complex, ambiguous situations, from confronting problems where the textbook answers don't work, from making decisions and living with the consequences, from failing and learning from failure, from being held accountable by communities that value truth. No algorithm can shortcut that journey. No dataset can capture that kind of wisdom. No training procedure can instill that quality of judgment. This is both challenging and liberating. Challenging because it means the path to real expertise becomes harder, not easier, in the AI age. You can't just memorize information anymore. You can't just follow templates or procedures. You have to develop genuine judgment through years of deliberate practice in genuinely difficult situations. That takes time. It requires resources. It demands mentorship from people who already have judgment. It doesn't scale. It's expensive. It's hard. Many people won't have access to the opportunities required to develop deep expertise. But it's also liberating because it means there's still something irreducibly human at the heart of expertise. Something that can't be automated or commodified or reduced to an algorithm. Something that gives human life meaning and dignity in an age of increasingly powerful machines. In an age where so much feels mechanical and artificial and algorithmic that matters profoundly, it means we still have a role. Not as information processors machines do that better, not as content producers machines do that faster, but as sense makers, as judges of what matters in specific contexts, as beings capable of wisdom, moral clarity, and practical judgment. As humans, the death of expertise, then, isn't really a death at all. It's a transformation. A painful, necessary, clarifying transformation that's forcing us to distinguish between the appearance of expertise and the reality, between credentials and capability, between information and wisdom, between knowing things and knowing what to do with them. The question isn't whether AI will replace experts. It's whether we'll remember what expertise actually means before we lose the ability to recognize it. Whether we'll value judgment enough to invest in developing it. Whether we'll build institutions that can validate and reward genuine wisdom. Whether we'll structure our economy and society to cultivate the kinds of humans who can exercise good judgment in complex situations. The choice is ours. The time to make it is now. Because every day the flood of slop grows larger. Every day the signal-to-noise ratio gets worse. Every day it becomes harder to distinguish genuine expertise from sophisticated mimicry. We're in a race between the proliferation of artificial content and the development of new systems for validating human judgment. Which side wins will determine not just the future of work or the structure of professional services, but the kind of civilization we become. One that can navigate complexity with wisdom, or one that drowns in the slop of its own creation. The technology is already here. The economic forces are already in motion. What remains undetermined is how we respond. And that, ultimately, is a question not of technology, but of values. Not of economics, but of ethics. Not of intelligence, but of wisdom.